Today, the meaning of faith. In our time, some associate the word religion with rigid dogma and the excesses of institutions. The word spirituality, on the other hand, can seem to have little substance or form. The word faith can appear as a compromise of sorts, pointing to the content of religious tradition and spiritual experience. The truth is, all of these words are vague in the abstract. They gain meaning in the context of human experience. We begin with Sharon Salzberg. She's one of a small circle of Americans who discovered Buddhism, studied in Asia with great Buddhist teachers, and brought this tradition to mainstream America in the 1970s. In 1976, she co-founded the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, now one of the most prominent Buddhist centers in America. And she's written a book called Faith, which she quickly admits is not a notion commonly associated with Buddhism.
It is an unusual word to associate with Buddhist teaching, and yet certainly it's intrinsic to the path he taught, because it's that moment which said, I'm going to try. That movement of our heart that says, yes, this can be for me. I think that we all rely on that kind of faith every single day, otherwise we wouldn't get out of bed, and that's faith. And so it's essential to the undertaking of any kind of spiritual life.
Sharon Salzberg was raised Jewish. In her childhood, she experienced a series of losses which might have destroyed faith of any kind. But Buddhism embraces suffering as a fact of human life, and that captivated her. I wanted to know how Sharon Salzberg got to this point, that after decades of practicing and teaching Buddhism, she wants to encourage delight in the word faith. To help reclaim faith, she writes, as fresh, vibrant, intelligent, and liberating.
When I first started writing the book, which was about 5 years ago, and I told people I wanted to write a book on faith, I was met with chagrin and amusement and dismay and even anger. And
right.
Because so many people associated that word with a loss of self-respect and just succumbing to the vision of truth of another, whether it was another person or a tradition or a kind of blind adherence to dogma. And
you recount this class that you just taught in Los Angeles where you wanted to use the word and everyone came forward with their story, and faith was really a word they experienced to be destructive and damaging.
Yes, very much so, where you could not ask questions, you could not speak your mind, you could not express your doubt. And that was the climate that I met a lot when I told people I wanted to write a book on faith. For me, faith has a lot to do with courage, and it's the courage to step forward into the unknown. And first of all, to admit that we don't know. You know, we can be so afraid to admit that and try to be in control of absolutely everything, and to actually admit we don't know, and yet to say, you know, I have the strength to go forward anyway, and to embrace what happens and to have an open-hearted participation in life. You know, for me, that's a meaning of faith.
Talk to me about what you have learned, what connotations the word, or at least the word as translated, has, you know, in your tradition. I mean, in Pali, it has different connotations, I think, even in the vocabulary when you're using the word, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes it's translated, the word in Pali, which is the language of the original Buddhist text, is saddha, S-A-D-D-H-A, and sometimes it's translated as faith, sometimes as trust, sometimes as confidence or clarity, even devotion. And in fact, when I was back in the days when I was still writing and telling people I was writing a book on faith, one of my friends said to me, well, why don't you give yourself a break and just call the book Trust, you know? You won't have all of those reactions. It'd be a lot easier, you know?
Yeah.
But there's something in me that did want to reclaim the word, you know, because it's so powerful a word and so misunderstood. I wanted us to be able to use it in a way that honored its incredible power. Because in Buddhist teaching, faith isn't a commodity that we either have or we don't have, and if we don't have enough or we don't have the right kind, we're going to be condemned maybe forevermore. But instead, faith it's like a journey, and it's an unfolding of the heart that's based on love for ourselves and being able to reach out to others and let others reach out to us, to have a bigger picture of life where there's a sense of belonging and connection instead of feeling so alone and apart.
There's this, the word saddha also, is it literally to place the heart upon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the literal translation.
Yeah, there's this wonderful connection that Buddhism makes between the heart and the mind. It doesn't take them apart in a way, right?
Yeah, they're actually the same word.
They're the
It's
same
exactly
word.
the same word.
Right.
As, interestingly enough, anger and fear are the same word. They're exactly the same word.
I'm just trying to think about how that also fills the notion with a different kind of meaning.
Yeah, well, I think, to place the heart upon depends on certain prior realizations. One is that we have a heart, and the other is that it's our conviction, it's our energy, and the kind of split that we experience is more of a Western notion, certainly than Asian. In every Buddhist language, it's the same word for heart-mind. But I think the understanding of faith is very different. It involves these different phases in Buddhist teaching. The first phase is called bright faith,
Right.
where the experience may be that, it's almost like we've been sitting in a dark and closed room with the door shut, and we feel that sense of confinement, and then the door swings open and the light comes in, and we realize it's a big world out there. And maybe we meet a teacher who moves us very much, who inspires us, or we read a passage or a book, or we're in a circumstance with a community. Something happens so that we feel lifted out of the circumstance of our life, and we have this sense of immense possibility, and we fall in love, basically.
We have to name this, that I think in English or in our culture, when we talk about faith, we have this association of faith in something, right? Faith in God. And when you're thinking about bright faith or as your faith matures, tell me how you think about it differently. How does that work?
Well, I think there are both things. There is the act of faith, which is really fascinating to explore regardless of what we have faith in, because that says something about ourselves. It says something about our sense of moving into the center of possibility and not just deferring that to somebody else. Like we could sit around and say, well, isn't that great? The Buddha got enlightened 2,500 years ago, but it's that moment of saying, what does that mean for me?
What was the geography of your faith in that life you were leading in India as you were discovering it? What did it look like? What were its characteristics? And, what were the experiences that you would call experiences of faith?
I was incredibly happy. And I think I had faith in various things. I had faith in the Buddha, not as a godlike figure, because he's not, but as a human being who had accomplished something that any human being really would want, to live with that much understanding and freedom of mind and boundless compassion. I had faith in the way that he described, or the Dharma, because that was really honoring the truth of each moment. It was saying that each moment's experience was a part of the path. And
sort of a way of being in the world, right? Is that?
Yeah, completely. Okay. And faith in the community that had preserved the teachings and also had sprung up around me. It was, for the first time in my life, I didn't really feel completely alone. It was a quality of happiness that meant that the present moment circumstance, even though they were challenging, were not defining the state of my heart.
Sharon Salzberg is a Buddhist teacher and author of a new book on faith. She embraced Buddhism in India and later in this country at places like the Naropa Institute in Colorado, which brought Asia's great Buddhist teachers to Americans. In Buddhism, she says, one stage of mature faith is called verified faith.
The Buddha said over and over and over again, don't believe anything. Don't believe anything just because I said it. Don't believe anything just because you've read it in a sacred text. He said, put it into practice. Put it into practice and see for yourself if it's true. And I'm not sure I really wanted that when I was in India. I was very young, and I just wanted somebody to kind of hold me and keep me safe and tell me what to believe and what not to believe. And yet, having come into a Buddhist tradition, all I heard over and over again was, don't believe anything, put it into practice. It's almost like, ironically enough, the movement from bright faith to verified faith is a movement that involves learning how to doubt. And so it's based on the feeling that we have both the right and the capacity to know for ourselves what is true. And all of my teachers just insisted on that, even though I didn't like it very much.
You wanted them to tell you, you wanted them to give you definitive truth.
Absolutely. I wanted them to tell me what was true and hold me to a certain standard of belief.
Right.
To say, well, to be a good Buddhist, you're going to have to believe these 15 things and don't ever ask about them.
We're breaking a stereotype here because you're saying that doubt and questioning are built into faith itself. Mm-hmm. They're part of the same thing. And you have this wonderful line. I love this. Questioning means longing to know the truth deeply and insisting that we can.
I think that when we look deeply into the meaning of faith, which has a lot to do with connection, it's connecting to our own deepest strengths, so that we're not defined by the circumstance we find ourselves in any given day. And then if the essence of faith is connection, then the opposite of that really would be not doubt, but a state of despair.
The opposite of faith is despair.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
I also think it's important that you acknowledge the fact that we do have beliefs and that we need beliefs and that we, as human beings, we hold them and our traditions hold them. Mm-hmm. And I was intrigued. You recount an incident where you were teaching at the Naropa Institute in Colorado, right? And you talked about a real disagreement that there is a different belief between, for example, Theravada and Tibetan Buddhism, between what happens after death. And it's simply the two interpretations of that are different. Mm-hmm. And you talk about a fight. And I think we have a lot of images in our society of Christians fighting or Jews fighting, but not so much of Buddhists fighting. I think it's good to know that happens too. And I don't think you're saying that those beliefs can be discarded, right?
Well, I don't think really we can discard beliefs. I think that everything really depends on how we use them. And the example at Naropa Institute was a perfect example where I was in a discussion with somebody from the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, and I had been much more highly trained in the Theravadan tradition. And they do hold two different belief systems about what happens after death, even though every Buddhist school posits a cycle of death and rebirth again and again. And that was what we were discussing, this person and I, and the discussion became quite heated until we were virtually shouting at each other. And he said to me, well, you're just lying, and he walked away. And I was kind of shocked. But the truth was, how would either of us know, what happens after death? And even a deeper truth was probably that my guess is that we were two people in some way afraid to die. And rather than discussing honestly the vulnerability of that emotion, we were masking it in these belief systems and trying to feel in control, by knowing or seeming to know. And that's the problem with beliefs, is that when we hold them that tightly and we use them to hide what we're feeling, then of course they don't take us onward to a state of greater faith. They become something else.
Sharon Salzberg's book is Faith, Trusting Your Own Deepest Instincts.